Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening to you both. Can we back away from the specifics, and can you remind the committee how much the legislature enacted by the signature of the governor increased funding for early childhood education this year?
The total was just over $493 million. That was a $50 million increase from FY18.
And Jason, you said in your testimony that the number of children being served increased by, was it 10,000?
About 10,000, yes.
So that $50 million got us early childhood education for 10,000 kids?
Yes.
10,000 more,
Yeah.
but not the same students that were served in the previous fiscal year.
That is my understanding, correct.
All right. How do you rectify the prevailing argument here that in order to change how school districts access money, that there should be no losers with what the State Board of Education did with the early childhood program?
Yeah, I don't.
Because we heard for many years that the lift for school funding was so monumental and would force so much change that we had to guarantee even school districts that were overfunded that they would not lose money. So how does that correlate with what the State Board of Education did with early childhood education this year?
Yeah, I don't have an easy answer for that. My understanding is within evidence-based funding, early childhood is not included. So I think, as Superintendent Hastings was suggesting, in addition to the kind of paradigm shift, there's a real tension between a competitive grant that is going to have some winners and some not winners, and then a funding formula which is looking at equity as the core principle.
The State Board embraces, I would assume, still the model that was put into place and that's now been in effect for, I guess we're coming up on 2 years now, right? Right? You support that. That's not a competitive grant.
Evidence-based funding.
Correct. Right. So why is a competitive grant structure put in place for this $500 million, but which was embraced by the State Board, directed by the State Board, but you would argue that access to equity funding should not be competitive based, right? You support the law.
Yes.
So why competitive here, but a completely different structure based on need, local capacity, challenges, number of bilingual students, number of special education, students with IEPs? Why is it this way for this pot of money and competitive for this pot of money?
Yeah, I, again, don't know if this will be a sufficient response, of course, but initially the early childhood block grant was supposed to be released, I believe it was in FY16, and then it was delayed for a couple of reasons. I'm not entirely sure what they are. And so I think what we saw here with the result clearly was a tension, a conflict with, we had a system that was newly rolled out that is working for the benefit based upon that core principle of equity, and then a system that was based upon either the evidence provided, the quality of the grant writer. I mean, but there's, I think you're pointing out a real tension and conflict.
Is there a correlation between applications that were submitted to the competitive grant process between awards and those written by a grant writer versus awards that maybe a principal had to cram in his or her day because they can't afford a grant writer?
I don't know the answer to that. I can certainly try to look into it for you.
I think we would all be interested in that information, because I think you understand, and I know the State Board, and I know Superintendent Smith understands that arguably school districts that probably need this money the most, support from state government, don't have access to money to hire a grant writer to be competitive in a competitive grant program. And I appreciate the fact that Superintendent Smith acknowledged that in a conversation to me. I hope that facilitates some change in the coming year. How many counties don't have a pre-K program today? Are there whole counties in downstate Illinois that don't have a single program?
There were 11 that did not apply at all.
Is that acceptable to the State Board of Education, that there are entire counties in Illinois that don't have a pre-K program?
No, I don't believe it is.
How do we fix that?
again, advocacy, outreach, support. I forget if it was Senator Weaver or someone else, one of the other senators, that was suggesting how do you get that technical assistance out to support individuals. We did have technical assistance that was provided by an entity outside of the state board. And some folks decided to access it, some folks didn't. And then to me, a question always is, if they didn't, why not? And what can we do to make sure that they can see that whatever the opportunity is, it's viable?
Were there
Senator Manar, real quick, we're having a really hard time hearing Jason. Is your microphone on? Is it, can I have you pull it closer then? I'm sorry, we have a fan back here too, I'm sorry.
Were there Jason, were there counties that had, and just to frame this, you know, there's multiple school districts in some counties there's only one, but were there counties that actually had pre-K programs that were funded under the old system that now are not, that would leave the entire county without a pre-K program, early childhood?
I would have to look into that.
Okay.
I don't know off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
All right. Final question, I suppose, digs a little bit deeper into the program itself. Do you have any idea how much money cumulatively last fiscal year that was drawn out of the appropriation in the budget to be spent on shade structures at school districts pursuant to a directive of the program?
No. No.
Could you find that out for me?
Yeah, so just to be sure I'm clear on your question, this would have been a materials instructional cost for shaded? Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay,
here's what I'm getting at. The state embraced programs. The state said those programs were successful. The state sent money to those programs after, in the fiscal year, those programs were not seen as good enough under the competitive program. At the same time, other school districts were spending money that they had left over because of a directive of the program on shade structures on playgrounds all over the place. They litter my district. So we're spending money on shade structures and we're cutting programs in some of the poorest school districts in Illinois. That's a mismatch of priorities, in my opinion. And I appreciate that the state board wants a high quality program. I appreciate that they want the very best and they put the standards really high. I would just advocate to you publicly today that I think the better option is to maybe cool it on the shade structures and fund more programs that were cut last year.